Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
Just not always the same ones.
I'm Steve Aiken. I'm the editor-at-large for Fine Gardening Magazine.
Hi, and I'm Danielle Sherry. You know this already. I'm the executive editor or something like that at Fine Gardening Magazine. I mean, we got to come up with a new opening because if it gets old to us, imagine the people who binge listen, because I binge listen for podcasts and it's Well, or they skip.
This is the part you skip over, yeah.
Yeah, skip.
What if this is somebody's first episode and they have no idea who these people are talking?
All right, so I'm Danielle, that's Steve, here we go. That's what we should do. Hi, I'm Danielle. Hi, I'm Steve. Let's go.
But we're not just random people.
Well, I mean, I consider myself a pretty random person.
Well, I do too, but there is some reason why we should be talking about, people should listen to our recommendations about plants. It's because we work with them all day. We tour the country looking at these things. We grow them,
True.
And maybe we're not botanists,
No, but we most certainly are not. Have you heard me pronounce anything in Latin? Right. We most certainly are not.
But we see these plants. We love these plants. We investigate these plants. We grow these plants in most instances. Because the first one I'm going to talk about, I don't grow. But it's so we are people who have enough knowledge to begin a conversation about plants, and we're not the be all and end all, and that's why we always end every episode with expert testimony.
With the people who actually know what the hell they're talking about. Yes,
right.
That's very true. Well, today's episode, after that, us talking about a short intro, that was the world's longest intro. But today's episode is spring blooming trees, or trees for spring. I didn't, you know what? You sent me your list and it didn't ring a bell. Did you pick all spring blooming trees?
Well, yeah.
I did too. Okay. Yeah. Well, because I was thinking, I put on my thinking cap and was trying to think of a tree that would be considered a spring wonder, an awesome spring tree that doesn't bloom. And I was thinking conifers that push new candle color. But how many times can I talk about my Perry's Golden, conifer? I can't talk about it anymore. And then the other ones I don't really have that much knowledge of. Can you think of any other attribute of a tree that would make it? I mean, I guess if it pushed great foliage or.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of Japanese maples too that flush out, yes. one color, and then fade to green or just red or something like that. But they but mostly conifers came to mind in that regard. They push colorful new growth in the spring. Yeah,
but we didn't do that. So
we didn't. It's about flowers.
It's about flowers, yeah. And spring really is about flowers. I mean, we've had one heck of a winter here, and we're getting 8 inches again today, on top of our 18 or whatever the heck's outside. After all that, man, I tell you, it could be the ugliest tree in the world, and as long as it put on some flowers in spring, I'd think that it was great. I really would, because I don't know if under normal circumstances, some spring flowering trees I would really be all that into. They're very confectionery, a lot of them. They're in pastel colors. That's generally not my jam. I'm not a pastel color person. I'm not a pink person, but I've got I think 2 pink flowering trees on here.
Wait a minute. I mean, your favorite tree, the tree that you have mentioned so many times that you can't even put it on this list because you've mentioned it so much.
Which
it's a Donny Golf Redbud, which is pink.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's pink though. I think that's borderline purple, red, magenta-y color. It doesn't. Pink. Okay, I think of pink as bubblegum cupcake pink. Do you have a vision?
I think of pink as anything light red. that to me is pink. It's pink. That's pink.
I mean, we've already proved you're color challenged when we did our blue episode and all your plants were purple. But yes, okay. So my Donny Golf, yes, I wanted to put that on there. So there were so many trees that I wanted to put on here. Water lily magnolia is another one of my favorite, but we've already talked about it. So I dug deep to really try to find trees that I know, I love, I grow, or I want to grow that I haven't mentioned before, because there are great ones out there.
Yeah, I feel like I've mentioned some of these before. I know I've mentioned a different species of one of these before,
Yeah.
but I couldn't not mention some of these. And the first plant I can't not mention, because when you say spring trees, it's the first thing I think of. But I've never grown it, but I love it from afar, and would grow it if I had the guts, and if I could find it. But it's Dovetree, davidia and volucrata. And so it's zone 6 to 8, so it'll grow around here. Also known as the handkerchief tree.
Perfect description.
Well, it's a dove tree is much more elegant than handkerchief tree. Also, sometimes called laundry tree.
That's great. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So the reason why it gets this name is not from the flowers, and this is going to be a repeat theme through this, is that the colorful part is the bracts. It's the things that go around the flowers, which to all of us look like the flowers and look like petals, but they're actually bracts. If anybody wants to get all perfectionly honest. So this around the little flower, which is a little round thing in the center part, are these two? There's only two white bracts that sort of curve around it, and one is shorter than the other. There's one is like, I guess it's 3 to 4 inches long, and the other one is up to 7 inches long, and they sort of wrap around this flower. They kind of hang in the tree, and look like doves. They flutter in the wind, so it looks like the tree is just covered in white birds or white handkerchiefs, whatever. But it's absolutely striking. I saw this tree at Blythewold, the public garden in Rhode Island.
I was just going to say that if you need a photo, I have photos of it from Blythewold, because it's so stunning.
Yeah, that's where my photos are. And I saw it from across the field, and I'm like, "Whoa, oh my God, what is that?" And I had to run towards it, and I'd never heard of it. It's that striking. Mm-hmm. And the one at Blythewold, and I'm not sure if all of them are like this, has a very tiered branching structure, almost like a pagoda dogwood to it. So it's just it's super eye-catching, gorgeous tree for spring. It has a distinctly pyramidal shape, can take light shade. So it has all these things going for it. Gets to be about 20 to 40 feet high is what my research shows. I would guess it would stay smaller in a garden. The downside to it is that it can take a while to flower. It has to grow up for a while. And then supposedly it doesn't flower every year. It's like an alternate flowering thing. Yeah. But when it does flower, it's amazing. It's kind of like Tom Brady can't win the Super Bowl every year, but when it does, it's amazing. Well, yeah, it almost seems like he does. So it's a wonderful tree when it does flower. But then the downside to it is that, get it to flower. That's you just have to wait a little while. No serious pests or diseases reportedly. Native to China.
Nice. Did we say zones on it?
We did. Obviously, you were not listening to
when I said the zone. Say it again. Well, okay, this is Dovetree.
Dovetree, davidia, and volucrata.
Yes.
Zones 6 to 8, Danielle.
That's 6 to 8.
6 to 8.
Okay.
So it has a decent range. It's not too cold hardy, not too heat hardy.
Right in the middle. I love it. I feel like to see this tree when it is blooming, quote unquote, is to think that it is a tree that has stark white leaves and green leaves all mixed together. And we're talking a large tree. So it just looks like a bicolor tree, white and green leaves all over it. And it is, and the white portions, the bracts, are almost tissue paper like that. When the sun shines through it, it's this very ethereal look to it. So Dovetree, yes, I think is accurate in that. But God, I love handkerchief tree, not dirty handkerchief tree. I mean, we're not talking saucer magnolias that get hit by frost and look like dirty handkerchiefs.
Yeah. No one was going there until you said that. And now you
Well,
just
that's what I thought. Dirty like when they call magnolias the dirty tissue trees because they get zapped by frost and they look like, I'm sorry. I had to go there. Look, the coffee's kicking in. So I speaking of magnolias, all right, so I just dissed on magnolias and I talked at the top of the show, like I love water lily magnolia. That's a Magnolia stellata, star magnolia that's fragrant. And I feel like it's the bee's knees. It's one of my all-time favorite trees. But I'm not going to talk about that magnolia. Instead, I'm going to talk about the magnolia that I usually recommend for people to plant when I used to work at the garden center, when I worked at nurseries. And that's Elizabeth magnolia, and that's zones 5 to 8. It's a hybrid, so it's just Magnolia Elizabeth. It's a yellow flowered magnolia. It is a classic in my mind magnolia that is, to see it mature in the landscape, it takes your breath away because it is a true yellow flower. We're talking Paula Deen butter yellow flower to it. And it is saucer sized. The flowers do get about this, the size of my hand, 8 inches or so. They are quite large. It is fragrant. It is so fragrant that you will smell it across the yard when this tree is all in bloom. And like many magnolias, it blossoms before it pushes its foliage. It is pyramidal in shape, which not all magnolias are. You get a lot of magnolias that are just these honking, wider than they are tall kind of behemoths, especially the saucer magnolias. 20 to 30 feet tall at maturity and about half as wide. It has silver bark to it too, so maybe that's the offset, that in early spring when not a lot else is going on, particularly in the cooler zones, zone 5 and 6, seeing that silver silhouette of a pyramidal tree then covered in these butter yellow large blossoms, it's really stunning. It's super, super beautiful. Full sun to part shade in moist, well-drained soil. I'll say a big thing with magnolias is typically they resent standing water. So make sure that, you don't put it in a rain garden area or, in a swale or anything like that. So this is a cross between Magnolia acumenta and Magnolia denudata. So it's the cucumber magnolia, and I forget what denudata is. the Yuan magnolia. So whatever. I mean, if that makes a difference to you, what I guess it supposedly takes its shape from the former, and it takes its blossom size from the latter. But who cares? Who really cares? And I probably didn't even pronounce those right. So who cares?
No, you didn't. No, I like knowing. I don't care who the parents are until somebody tells me like what qualities they get from each, like you just did.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't mean anything to me to say like it's a cross between these two because I don't know those two. But if you say it gets X from one and Y from the other, like I know it is a plant that has these two things.
Yeah.
Because unless you know the parents, it doesn't matter. I mean, think of a person like there's Doug. His parents are Mike and Judy. If you don't know Mike and Judy, you're like, who cares? But like, hey, Mike's a good guy and Judy's a lot of fun. So Mike's probably a good guy, Anyway.
Yeah. True. Very true. Well, so who did this? I didn't know about who patented this until I was researching this for the show, was Brooklyn Botanic Garden back in the late 70s, actually patented this Elizabeth magnolia, and it was, their creation. But so stunning. Yellow flowers, fragrant flowers, magnolia, and zones 5 to 8, Elizabeth. Just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. All right, Steve, you're up next. Give me a pink flowering tree.
No. I got a thing I'm building to, and you're
all right, fine. God, you never listen to me.
No, I do. Like, and you never learn from past experience that I'm not going to listen to. And I got a thing I'm doing here.
All right. Build, baby, build.
I don't really, but anyway.
Are you going?
I'm trying to think of a transition from whatever the heck it was you were talking about.
We did
Uh,
transition. Magnolia, beautiful, lovely. Now, give me a magnolia. Give me something better than Elizabeth. You
well,
can't do it.
no, I can't. Elizabeth sounds great. I'm sure she's wonderful. There's that whole series of magnolias that they call them the girls or something like that. There's Anne, there's Elizabeth, there's
Mm-hmm.
Jane, and they're
Mm-hmm.
supposedly all great. The next plant I think of when I think of spring trees is Carolina Silverbell,
Mm.
which is a perfect
Alicia?
name. Yeah, it's one of the few common names that I like. But Carolina Silverbell just sounds why you got to get yourself a Carolina Silverbell, don't you? And no garden's complete without a Carolina Silverbell. Well, I do declare, isn't that a Carolina Silverbell over
I
yonder?
do declare.
Yeah.
Oh, bless
Uh,
her heart.
it's just a great sounding name,
It
and it's a
is.
perfect name for this plant. You could go with Hallie Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
which you said it's it's in the middle of its botanical name is murky. Like they're doing that thing that they're doing. They have a perfect name, Hallie Carolina, but it might
And
be
now they're going to
Hallie.
make it a salvia.
Well, they're keeping Hallesia, but the species are changing. You can find it also Hallesia tetraptera, and I think there's another one.
That
And
sounds like a
with
dinosaur. That's so
right,
dumb. I don't like
um,
that. No, I reject that.
but there are other options. There are groups in there. But if you go with Carolina Silverbell, you're gonna find the right tree.
Mm-hmm.
And well, what kind of tree are you getting? You're getting a tree that has these in spring. It has these white bells just all over the undersides of the branches, and it's amazing. Because you look up at most trees, and you're looking up at just scores of bells. And scores is underselling. It's just covered in these beautiful white bells, and it's mid to late spring. I would say, maybe late April into May. I don't know what season that
Mm.
is. I consider
Well,
uh,
here in the Northeast.
right, but even still, like I consider May to be like mid May to be oh well that's the start of summer. Like
Yeah.
at the end of May, like that's the start of summer. Maybe not mid
Oh,
May.
really? No,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah, because
June.
because because you can start wearing shorts then. So that's
Oh,
you know,
okay.
and you're starting to think about summer vacation. So that's why I get confused about that. But like April to May in the Northeast is when it blooms. But they are white bells all over the undersides of the branches, and I'm trying to make that sound as spectacular as it is, but I can't because that's what they are, and
Mm.
it's just everywhere, and it's just absolutely stunning. And this is the tree. Actually, we were talking about Blythewald and Dovetree, and how Dovetree attracted my attention. Then I turn around, and I'm like, "What is that?" And it's Carolina Silverbell. Um,
Yeah.
growing above the Mason-Dixon line in Rhode Island, and it's just it again draws you from so far away with this stunning scene. Gets to be 30 to 40 feet high. Again,
Mm.
I can like once it gets taller than me, like I don't know what 30 feet high is. That sounds it's not
Three
towering.
stories.
It's it kind of have like a broad, rounded shape to it, I guess. If you stand back far enough and can see, full sun to partial shade. It can take partial shade. Needs acidic soil, and it's as its name suggests. It's a eastern native. I think West Virginia, down to Florida, and then west to I think it said like eastern Oklahoma. So basically
Mm-hmm.
to the Mississippi River is where it's native to, and this is just a absolutely stunning spring tree. It's perfect for sitting underneath and drinking some sweet tea. Um, it just absolutely brings joy.
I feel like it always reminds me in flower shape and its performance to Styrex japonica.
Yes.
So it reminds me of Styrex, but what Halesia has going for it that Styrex doesn't is Halesia blooms before it puts on its foliage. So that floral performance, right? Am I right? That floral
Right.
performance is like boom, as opposed to Styrex, where it's a really impressive white silver bells performance, but it competes with the foliage because the leaves are out when it blooms.
Yeah. but no. The flowers come out like before the leaves, but they're still there when the leaves start popping out. So it's kind of it's
Okay, so
um,
it like
you
it
know.
because I've only seen Halesia when it's like Oh, this is so we saw this tree when you took me on photo training when I first started at Fine Gardening to that garden where that gentleman had the flags painted along the
Oh
tree
yeah, yeah,
stumps
yeah.
all
I know what
along.
you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And I just remember that was my first experience with seeing it outside of the nursery setting as an actual mature tree. And that was so early. That was I feel like it was late April. And it was just yeah, the tree was covered in blossoms, and I thought, oh God, is that a styrax? No, it can't be. It doesn't have any leaves on it. So
Yeah,
beauteous.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, top that.
I will. All right, so I feel as if when you're first starting out gardening, Steve, you go to a garden center, you're looking for a tree, you're all amped up in spring because that's usually when, newbie gardeners start their gardens. And the nurseries are chock-a-block full of weeping cherry trees.
Hmm.
And I hate to call a spade, but as years progressed, there are these horribly grafted things where you get this chunky stem and this gnarl of a graft about 2 feet, 3 feet tall, and then the flowering weeping cherry on the top. And I got to tell you, when I worked in nurseries, I just thought those things were the most god awful, ugly things I've ever seen. I've come to appreciate ones that are grafted nicely or on lower grafts. They're a pretty tree, but it made me turn up my nose at most flowering cherry trees, except one that would come a little bit later in the season, which I had in my old garden, and that's Hallie Julieta flowering cherry, which is prunus. Hallie Julieta. It is again a hybrid, zones 5 to 8. This is not a weeping cherry. This is a thick, rounded 15 by 10, sometimes multi-stem, sometimes topiaried as a lollipop form cherry tree. And it's the lightest, palest pink that you can imagine. It's got these dime-sized flowers that come and cover the tree prior to leaves again. And it just looks like a cloud of powdered sugar. I can't come up with another way. And the breeze will blow, and these little tissue paper like blossoms will sprinkle down. They don't make a mess because they're really insignificant in size, but it's really, really magical, this tree. And in the center is a slightly reddish stamen center to these tiny, tiny confectionery pink flowers. It reminds me a lot of Geranium Bayakova, where it's a pale, pale pink, but then it's got maybe a little bit of red stamens in the middle. It has pointy when the blossoms eventually subside. It comes out with these pointy, I don't know, leaf shape leaves, the standard leaf shape. I don't know how to describe them other than they're leaf shaped.
But
You get
that perfectly described, like in my mind, like, oh, I know what she means. Yeah, they're shaped
it's
like
a leaf
leaves.
shape. Yeah, they're shaped like leaves, leaf shape. And they come out bronze, kind of a coppery bronze color, and then eventually fade to a dark green. Then in fall, they light up on fire and turn this burgundy copper color again in fall. The bark on this cherry is really cool too. It's a shiny, reddish bark to it. So it's got some winter presence as well. Full sun, well drained soil. It usually when it gets drought, it gets stressed from drought. It can be susceptible to borers, which most plants, if they're stressed from drought, they're going to get some sort of terrible disease or insect invader. So I don't think that that's any reason to discount it. And yeah, I guess I already talked about that it can be grown as a multi-stem tree. That's often how you'll find it in the nurseries. And sometimes people mismark it or say that it's a large shrub. Large shrub, small tree. It's a small tree. And yeah, it's just really, really beautiful. You know what? I'm not going to say this. I believe I know why it was named Hallie Julieta. I think it was the former director or the director's wife of Arnold Arboretum in Boston, but I'm not sure. So
Did
I just
you did,
started a rumor.
did you mention the height of
Yeah,
Haley
yeah, yeah,
Joliet?
yeah. Yes, yes. I call it Hallie. It doesn't have an E.
Whatever. Did you mention the height of this tree that you were talking about?
Yes, 15 feet tall
Okay.
and 10 to 12 feet wide. So small tree.
Yeah. Yeah, that's this. Guess I'm asking because I'm thinking like, well, how do I add this to my yard? How do I add this to my yard? So I need to know the
Yeah,
size, and it's small enough for me to squeeze in. You know,
it is small.
when you first mentioned the weeping cherry trees, I thought about weeping cherries, weeping crab apples, and how I once heard an Irish garden designer was talking about how everyone had they called them confirmation trees. So because people would buy them so because they would bloom around the same time that kids were getting their first confirmation, and so they get their
Yes,
picture taken, next to or in front of this
in
tree.
front of the cherry tree.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
so that's what came to mind with that. But I like that it's not a weeper, right? So
It's
it's
not a weaver.
yeah.
It's not
So
a weaver. It's a thicket, kind of a rounded ball lollipop shape to it, and a little bit later too than those weeping cherry trees. This one's late spring. So if you're thinking, well, it's hard for us, but in the perspective, I would say that this one is late April into the beginning of May as opposed to early April.
yeah, my next tree the name kind of says it all with my next tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's called white fringe tree. So it's a tree with white fringe on it. Those are the flowers,
Shocking.
right? Right.
Shocking.
But it's amazing. You know this tree?
I do. I know it as, I think they also call it old man's beard.
Yeah, which doesn't sound attractive to me. It's like dirty hanky or whatever.
So
But
let's for those keeping track at home. Steve has done the dirty hanky tree and the old man stinky beard tree.
you added the stinky part, so you keep adding to it. Okay, it was just handkerchief tree. You added the dirty, and now you added the stinky. I don't know why your mind goes where it goes to. But anyway, white fringe tree, Caenothus virginicus, zones 4 to 9, so it's pretty cold hardy. And as the name suggests, it gets these wonderful flowers that hang down a good 7 inches. They get these really nice clusters, these panicles of fringe, the white fringe that hangs down, and it's amazing show in spring. It always reminds me of, because I have to make a music reference, it always reminds me of the shirt Roger Daltrey was wearing at Woodstock. So if you Google Roger Daltrey Woodstock, you'll see what I'm talking about. Or for those of you who don't know who Roger Daltrey is, the lead singer of The Who. So if you Google The Who Woodstock and look for the guy with the microphone, when he's moving his arms, that's exactly what this tree's flowers look like. So a lot of you out there know what I'm talking about. Some of you don't, and that's why I provide the Google option for you.
And if you're listening in the car, please don't take the time now to Google. Please pull over, Google, and then proceed forward. We have to put in that warning.
But I think most people who know that era know exactly what I'm talking about. It's one of the coolest outfits in rock history, and it's currently in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah, so
fact.
it and just to go way farther into something I shouldn't have gone into to begin with, it's not just when the fringe hangs down, but it's when he moves his arms and the fringe starts flying. That's what this flower looks like. Like I said, like 10 inches long. Just these huge clusters of cool fringe on a tree that gets 12 to 20 feet tall and wide. Super easy to grow, full sun to partial shade. We're talking late spring here with these flowers. There are male and female versions of the tree. How to know whether you're getting which, I don't know. But if you do get the female, you can also get fruit, which the birds will love. I don't think any people do, but the birds love it. And also another benefit to it, I'm going with another native here. This is native. I think southern New Jersey is what I read. Southern New Jersey down to Florida and west into Texas, cold, frigid Texas right now.
Oh,
So yeah,
great.
so I've done two out of three of my plants so far have been natives. Danny, I'm not sure how many you've done. Um,
You're so mean. I've got a native coming up. Don't you call me out. Don't you put me on blast.
I think I just did.
You did. All right, keep going, Roger Daltrey.
Well, I mean that's it. That's the hallmark of this tree. I think it gets okay fall color.
Yeah,
But
bright yellow.
yeah,
Actually, I think
um,
it's pretty decent fall color.
yeah. I'm thinking of Carolina Silverbell, which has so fall color, and Dovetree, which I did mention, has no fall color. I think it just drops its
Mm.
leaves. Like the first time frost hits, it's like that's it, we're done. Uh, yeah, yeah.
Game
But
over.
it's these, yeah, fringe tree. And like when you see it in spring, you say, "Oh, I know why it's called that." And isn't it amazing? How do I add this to my garden?
Yeah. And it doesn't get too huge, so it is easily added to, well, I say easily, but it can be easily incorporated into your garden, pre-existing garden. It's not, you're not investing in a giant oak with this tree.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's one of the things that we should point out about most of these trees is they're not that huge. So
No.
we of course have tulip trees in our yard and
Yes.
always have. And tulip trees get these really cool flowers. You'll never see them because they're up so high. You'll see them when they fall to the ground.
When they
Like
fall down, yeah.
that's all you see. And that's a shame. But the trees we're talking about today are small enough that you can enjoy the blooms on them.
True.
And yeah,
Very true. Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, with that said, I'm going to mention a 40-foot tall tree. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to do another small tree, and it's native. Red Buckeye, Aesculus pavia. Love this tree. Love this tree so much. This tree is native to southeastern North America. So it's North Carolina to Florida, then west to Texas, and then north again up to Illinois. So in that whole area, Ohio Buckeyes, you got the area that I'm talking about. But this tree, this red buckeye, looks like it belongs in St. Croix or the Virgin Islands. It looks tropical. It has these really, really large palmate, hand-like leaves to it, compound palmate, and really, really, really prominent veining on the leaves. So you kind of get this texture ripple to it. And then in late spring, early summer, it gets panicles of red tubular flowers with a yellow throat. So trumpet vine, kind of in that vein of the look that the hummingbirds go absolutely bananas over. And I was reading a whole bunch for Midwesterners that this tree starts blooming when the ruby-throated hummingbirds start making their way back into the area from their migratory pattern. So it's perfectly timed because the hummingbirds are just, I mean, this is a hummingbird tree. And how often do you say, oh, this is a great tree for hummingbirds? We're usually talking about perennials, maybe some shrubs, but so red buckeye, it's 12 to 15 feet tall and 12 to 15 feet wide. It tends to have kind of more of that lollipop shape to it, and usually 2 to 3 feet of clearance naturally, without any underneath it, without any pruning or such. I've recently seen this tree beginning to be used here in the Northeast as a street tree, and I'm really shocked to see that and see that it's doing fairly well. It doesn't have a lot of aerial root systems, so I have a feeling that's why it was chosen. And but it tends to like moist, well-drained soil. So I don't know how that equates with being in a really, really high traffic, not a very moist area. But in the areas that I've seen it, both in Boston and down in New York, it's doing really well that I've noticed over the past several years. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't know if I mentioned the size of the panicles, but the panicles of flowers are 10 inches long. I mean, this is impressive. Very, very striking. It looks like the tree is shooting fireworks out of it. And those flowers are followed by seed pods that are brown seed pods. I think if you've seen the Ohio Buckeye, mascot, you kind of know what they look like, and they're actually not edible. So they're not like the fudge and peanut butter Buckeyes. So you cannot eat them, Steve. So don't try to eat them. But wildlife tends to snack on them. And that's about it. That's all I got to think about that. Oh, it tolerates clay soil too, which makes sense, for its native range. And I know that we've got a lot of listeners who are always like, you guys don't mention anything for clay soil. And that's because we don't really have clay soil around here, but this is a very good tree for clay soil.
The whole genus Aesculus is a great one, because every time I see them, I think, why am I not growing this? I need to grow this. But then when it comes time to pull the trigger on buying one, I don't, for some reason. I don't know what it is, but to see them all, they're so amazing. That I don't know why I grow. And again, as you're talking about the tree, I'm like, I know exactly where I can put this. This would be perfect for this spot. But I know a year from now, when we're sitting here, I will not have planted Aesculus pavia.
So I feel like because, I've always loved Aesculus too. And I feel like the one that hops to mind is it Parviflora, which is more of a thicket, like a large shrub type of look to it, and really large shrub. We're talking, 10 to 15 feet tall. And it creates kind of a big old bulky mass. And it has white kind of airy flowers to it. It's not all that striking, but on the flip side, this red Buckeye, this red Aesculus is really different looking than a lot of the other of the genus. So yeah, I feel like it's the winner of the genus in my humble opinion.
Okay, great. If you buy me one, I'll plant it.
Deal.
So my last tree is also a native, Danielle. That would make 3 out of 4.
Salt.
Yes. But we've done a show on red buds, haven't we? We did an entire episode on red buds.
Yes.
No. I feel like we did.
No, but we have mentioned several different red buds through the years.
Yeah. But anyway, so we should, this show should have one red bud on it. It doesn't.
It should.
But
I know.
But it also has to have, I think, the queen of the spring flowering trees is the dogwood, Cornus florida. The flowering dogwood is just, if you drive around the Northeast, if you drive around the East, because I tend to think of them North Carolina when I go down there, and you see these understory trees. It's red buds and it's flowering dogwoods, and they're just amazing. You're like, oh my God, I have to have one of those. And there are so many cultivars of flowering dogwood out there. And to help you with your choices in the Cornus genus, we have an article coming up on the genus Cornus, where we have experts from all over the country take us through their choices for their favorite dogwoods. And Paul Cappiello from Udell Gardens, who actually wrote the book on dogwoods, is the Bible,
basically, on dogwoods.
He's the main author of that. But one of the trees he doesn't mention is the one I'm going to mention today. Cherokee Chief is the dogwood I chose for a couple of reasons. Number one, I realized that the previous trees that I had recommended were all white flowered. And there's more to spring than white flowers. So I chose Cherokee Chief because it's great and because it has these deep red, not flower, again, they're the bracts, but what we would see as the flower are these big, wide, deep red petals, bracts, that get sort of white as they get towards the true flower. So they have just this gorgeous pop of color in the spring. It gets to be about 20 feet high and wide. One of the other cool things about Cherokee Chief is that the new foliage growth is also, it has like red tinges to it. And then it gets great fall color. And then of course you get the berries, which last until the birds discover them and then they're gone. It's usually like one day where the birds say, like, here they are, and they come in like a if anyone has ever had their kitchen descended upon by a bunch of hungry teenagers, there is food in the kitchen before they get there, and then 10 minutes after that, there's nothing left.
Nothing.
So it's kind of like that. Partial shade, so that's good. You don't have to have full sun. You do have to have acidic soil, though, to grow a dogwood. And again, native to the eastern United States. So one of the best red flowering cultivars is Cherokee Chief.
Okay, now I'm going to put you on the spot because is Cherokee Chief, I think it's part of a series, right? And there's Cherokee Spring and there's Cherokee Dawn, maybe?
I know there's a white one that has Cherokee in the name, and yeah, there's a lot of breeding series with the dogwoods.
And it was, is that the Rutgers? Is that the Rutgers breed that it came out of the Rutgers breeding? No, it is not. Okay. So. All right. There's something with the Cherokee series, and maybe it's because they're known to be a little bit more anthracnose resistant. I don't remember. There's something there. And the only reason is because this came up with Paul Cappiello and I recently, and I don't remember what it was, and it's killing me. So sorry. That was
yeah. So what I heard it was potentially slightly more disease resistant.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Which is always good. You know, I mean, I think dogwoods get a bad rap for being disease prone.
Yeah.
Particularly Cornus, Florida, right?
Yeah. But it's one of those things where if you keep it not stressed, it's going to be a lot healthier. And also anthracnose, I believe, can be treated largely by cleaning up the leaves in fall. And I'm generally a leaf leaver. I leave the leaves. But there are certain things that you just clean up around. It takes like 2 minutes to, wait till they're on the ground and you pick them up because anthracnose overwinters on those leaves.
Okay.
Is my understanding.
That's awesome.
I could be wrong, but yeah. So, but I haven't had a problem with disease on this tree, and I do not give it a lot of care at all. But that's kind of the only thing I do. Like, clean up the leaves just in case there's anything on them. It's one of the few plants that I do that to.
Nice. I like that. I mean, I think that's important to mention because a lot of times a plant or a genus, species, whatever the case may be, gets a bad rap from one particular thing, and in this area, you mentioned like, native flowering dogwood, and people go, anthracnose. And it's like, no. You just have to clean up the leaves really underneath it. And that can keep that issue at least at bay. And it's not, you're not buying a tree that is destined to be diseased.
Yeah. But what I've found with dogwoods, and this is just my experience, is that if you keep them happy, like if you keep them happy at the beginning, get them off to a good start, then they don't seem to have a lot of the problems. A lot of the problems arise when they're under stress or people plant them too deeply. As with any tree, you don't want to plant it too deep. So if it's not happy, it's going to be host to a whole bunch of problems. But if you get it off to a good start, keep it watered, at the beginning, give it a good root system, make sure it's planted right, and then just clean up the leaves in fall. Like I said, I haven't had any problems with borers or anthracnose or any of the other things that you can get with dogwoods. But that's just my experience. I mean, I don't.
And they're so beautiful. I mean, they are a classic spring plant, much like my next tree version of a plant that's a classic. That was a terrible transition, but I tried really hard. Okay. So I think spring, I think lilacs.
Sure.
I just think of that. I think we've talked about lilacs before in other shows, normally seen as a shrub. Normally puts on flowers and then looks like a green blob for the rest of the year and then gets ridden with powdery mildew. So not great other than for flowers, but there's a lilac tree, Syringa reticulata. This particular cultivar I'm going to mention is Summer Snow, which is a Japanese tree lilac. And this is not a tree I grow. The full disclosure. This is a tree that Ed Gregan has been trying to, our author Ed Gregan, and also a family relation, has been trying to get me to grow, I would say, for the last decade. And he he basically says this is one of the most underrated trees out there. So it's got a leaf that's typically a lilac type leaf. It's got a bit of a shinier green teardrop shaped leaf to it. It's going to be a tree that's 20 feet tall and about 20 feet wide, they say. But it grows naturally with an understory of about 4 feet. So that foliage doesn't start until about 4 feet off the ground, which provides you with a lot of garden opportunities that you can underplant this tree really easily, and there's not a lot of pruning to really get that natural lollipopped look to it. Full sun, well-drained soil, takes drought stress, tolerates salt, tolerates pollution. Again, another tree that a lot of cities are trying to adopt into a street tree. So that, kind of harkens back to how tough this tree is. And then what ends up happening is a little bit later than your normal shrub lilacs, this summer snow Japanese tree lilac in late spring, early summer starts to put on what I would just call these giant panicles of white cotton candy flowers. And the second that these big, cotton candy, white puffy things get covered onto the tree, you will start to hear a noise. And it is the noise of a plethora of pollinators just attacking this tree. And, you're hearing the bzzz and the trees moving around, and it's so awesome. It's fragrant as well. So, you're getting that fragrance and you get to enjoy it just as much as, the pollinators do. And the reason I picked summer snow is because it's a cultivar that they say holds the blossoms longer, because a lot of people knock the Japanese tree lilacs, this Syringa reticulata, because those flowers tend to go by really quickly, but summer snow holds onto those flowers for several weeks, so you really get a nice blossoming show. And then it gets a little bit of fall color, a little bit of yellow fall foliage, kind of like the fringe tree that you talked about earlier. But also, I don't think I mentioned this, but zones 3 to 7. So this is for those, those people who write into us and say, you never mention anything for zone 3 and 4. This tree is really, really winter hardy. So, I think of all things, I might actually have to listen this year and plant this tree in my garden. I think it would be a nice transitional tree too, because I have a lot of early spring flowering trees, and then I have a lot of summer flowering shrubs and trees. So this would be that bridge to the bloom gap that I have right now.
I think, one of the general rules of gardening, and there aren't many, there are not a lot of things that are true across the board gardening, but one of them is, if somebody's offering you a free tree, you take it.
Well, I didn't say he was offering it for free. He's just been trying to convince me that this is a tree I have to grow. Well, but he does happen to work for a very large nursery, so I'm sure I could weasel my way into a free tree.
Look, you just say, Ed, you want me to grow it? You buy it. I'll plant it.
I like it. Very true.
And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter with his take on spring trees.
I know that in talking about spring trees, Steve and Danielle were gushing over all the colourful flowers and new growth to be found. And we all know well the wonders that tree foliage can hold in autumn. But what about summer, the season which seems so much longer than those on either side of it? The important thing to remember about trees is that they are givers. Of course, you could read that classic of children's literature, The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, but I'm talking more specifically about the garden. I've already mentioned what trees can do in spring and fall. In winter, trees, be they evergreen or deciduous, provide structure, their stately frames dominating our attention when we so desperately need something to look at. But what about summer? Then they provide what that season needs most, shade. Obviously, some trees provide more than others, but any shade should be welcomed. A landscape bleached with sunlight is rarely the most pleasant thing to look at, let alone be in. Even if the shade that a tree casts is not enough for you to sit in, it still adds dimension, pattern, and contrast to the scene. And for those of you out there saying, shade? Why, that's all I have. Then on the next hot August afternoon, take a moment to understand and appreciate how lucky you are.
I'd like to thank Peter for his thoughts on spring, as interesting as they are.
I will say what I would find more interesting is actually the expert testimony. Let's see who we have up next.
Hi, my name is Matt Lobdell, and I'm curator of the Morton Arboretum in Lisle, Illinois. Here in the Midwestern United States, our winters are generally bitterly cold, so spring is long awaited. So today it's my pleasure to talk about a few of my favorite spring flowering trees. First up is the Louisa crabapple. Crabapples are very widely planted in the Midwest, mostly for their profuse flowering. They perform quite well and they always put on a pretty good show. Louisa is one of my favorites because it's not the tallest crabapple in the collections. It's about 12 feet in height and 15 feet in spread. It's a little bit broader than it is tall, but it has this nice graceful weeping habit, which looks particularly impressive when it produces its profusion of soft pink flowers in the early spring. This was a selection by Polly Hill, who is a horticulturist living in West Tisbury, Massachusetts. For the purposes of full disclosure, that is my hometown, but that's not the reason I recommend it. I'm actually recommending it due to its good disease resistance as observed at the Morton Arboretum. So here we have 3 diseases that can wreak havoc on our crabapples throughout the growing season: cedar apple rust, fire blight, and apple scab. Louisa has pretty good resistance to all 3 of them. It's somewhat less resistant to apple scab than it is the other 2. And it's additionally very resistant to mildew. So it's a good crabapple, it's got a good habit, and it will keep its foliage much later into the season as some of the other crabapples will. We'd recommend this probably for zones 4 to 7. Another thing to note is it needs at least some drainage. Crabapples don't usually perform very well in saturated soil, so if you have a good spot where you can fit this, I think it would make a great addition to your garden. The next plant I'd like to recommend is the Butterflies Magnolia. So Butterflies is a yellow flowering magnolia, and yellow flowering magnolias sometimes have a few complaints associated with them. One is they can get way too big. Some of them can get up to 40 to 60 feet. Some of them might not be yellow enough. A lot of them tend to have flowers which are really more creamy white than they are true yellow. And some do have very yellow flowers, but they simply appear too late, usually with the leaves, so it's a little bit harder to see the flowers. You don't really get the full effect. Now, Butterflies is one that I think addresses all 3 of these complaints. First, it's a much smaller tree. It only gets to about 15 feet in height and 10 feet in spread. The flowers are much brighter. They're really a canary yellow in color as opposed to that more cream color. They are smaller than a lot of the other yellow magnolias, but they have more petals, so about 12 to 15 instead of the usual 9. It's a little bit different, but very attractive. It does flower a little bit later in the spring than most of the other magnolias, so once your star magnolias are done, you might start to see a little bit of activity on this one. And this is actually an advantage, though, because it's usually flowering late enough in the season that it's missing those spring frosts, which just curse magnolias in most parts of the country. Another complaint I have about spring sometimes is it's just simply too short. We spend so much time waiting for it, and then usually you spend maybe a few days looking at crabapple flowers and a week, if you're lucky, looking at magnolias, and then it's over. You're just ready for the green of summer. So I wanted to just talk about one group of plants which actually can help extend the spring flowering season just a little bit. And these would be the snowbells, or the genus Styrax. So the first one is the Japanese snowbell, or Styrax japonicus. It's still a small-ish tree. It'll usually get about 20 feet in height by 20 feet in spread, maybe 30 or even more in better conditions. And this flowers, again, after the cherries, after the magnolias, after the crabapples are all done, and it will produce this profusion of white flowers. Sometimes it can be pink on some selections, but those will fade to white in the hot sun. So it's a great tree, particularly later on in the late spring. You'll see a dusting of flowers on the ground, almost reminiscent of fallen snow. There are many cultivars that have been selected. Some of them are a little bit taller or narrower in habit. The standard type tends to be fairly broad. It is a heavy seed producer, which is something to keep in mind. You will find a profusion of seedlings underneath the plant, so something to keep in mind if you're maybe a little bit concerned about it spreading. We do have some of these at the Morton Arboretum in Zone 5, but I'd say it's probably more of a Zone 6 to 9 plant. In very harsh winters, we've had some of them die back completely to the ground. Some cultivars are maybe a little bit hardier than others, but particularly if you're in Zone 7, I think this is something certainly worthy of consideration. One thing to keep in mind is it can be a little bit difficult to site. It needs about as much sun as you can give it, but it also doesn't want too much sun. So it's something where you want to give it a little bit of protection, but still make sure it's getting enough exposure to flower well. Now, if you wanted to try a Styrax, but you're a little bit afraid of some of the cold hardiness, this one is a little bit harder to find, but it's also a little bit hardier. This is the fragrant snowbell, or Styrax obesia. This is a much larger tree. It can get up to about 30 feet. Our specimens at the Morton Arboretum are much smaller, about 12 to 15, though they're not exactly growing in the most ideal conditions for the plant. But it does flower pretty profusely, but a little bit differently. Instead of really having a profusion of flowers like the crab apples will, you see flowers on these long panicles or inflorescences, and they can be somewhat hidden by the large leaves, but if you get up close to the plant, or even if you have the privilege of standing underneath it, it's really a sight to behold, and it can be a very fragrant plant as well. So thank you again for having me on. I hope you'll consider those few selections as something to improve your garden this spring. Thank you.
So, another of the quintessential trees that must be named is the crabapple, and I'm glad that Matt brought one of those into the show.
Oh, definitely. You know what? That fell off of my list was Sergeant crabapple, because that's another small tree that I really, really like. I mean, I think I need to make more room in my garden, because we just have way too many trees that I need from this episode.
Sergeant Crabapple was originally the name of the Beatles album, but they changed it for the better, I think.
You're right.